1945. August 6th, the world changed forever. At 8:15 in the morning, a single aircraft dropped a single bomb over the Japanese city of Hiroshima. 3 days later, another bomb fell on Nagasaki. Within seconds, 2 entire cities were obliterated. Over 200,000 people were killed instantly or died from radiation in the following months. These were the first and only times nuclear weapons have been used in warfare. But here's what most people don't understand. The decision to drop these bombs wasn't made overnight. It wasn't a knee-jerk reaction to Pearl Harbor. Instead, it was the culmination of years of secret research, strategic planning, and one of the most agonizing decisions any leader has ever had to make. This is the story of why America chose to unleash the atom on Japan. If you think you know this story, think again. Because what I'm about to reveal goes far beyond what you learned in history class. We're going to uncover the secret project that cost more than the entire Manhattan SK invasion-y scraper district, the plan that would have made D-Day look like a beach picnic, and the political chess game that shaped the entire Cold War. By the end of this video, you'll understand not just what happened, but why it had to happen. Let me start with something that will shock you. Before August 1945, probably fewer than a few dozen people in the entire United States knew what was really being built in the deserts of New Mexico and the over mountains of Tennessee. 100,000 Americans day. Monnet went to work, every single oared dials and switches behind thick concrete walls, while mysterious reactions took place just feet away from them. They had no idea they were building the most destructive weapon in human history. This was the Manhattan Project. And to understand why America dropped the bomb, you first need to understand the sheer scale of what they had created. Picture this. It's 1942. The United States has just entered World War II. While American soldiers are fighting and dying across 2 oceans, back home, the government is secretly pouring money into a project so classified that workers were threatened with 10 years in prison just for talking about it. The project would eventually employ over 600,000 people and cost nearly $2 billion. In today's money, that's $35 billion. But here's the crazy part. Over 90% of that money wasn't spent on research or development. It was spent on building massive factories to produce the fuel for these weapons. Entire cities were constructed from scratch in places like Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and Hanford, Washington. These weren't small operations. We're talking about industrial complexes that rivaled anything Detroit was producing for the war effort. The workers lived in government housing, shopped at government stores, and sent their children to government schools, all while having absolutely no idea what they were actually building. They were told they were working on a project to help win the war. Nothing more. Imagine going to work every day, following precise instructions, handling dangerous materials, and never knowing why. Meanwhile, in the desert of New Mexico, a team of the world's brightest scientists were racing against time. They called their test site Trinity. On July 16, 1945, at 5:30 in the morning, they detonated the first atomic bomb in human history. The explosion was so bright it could be seen from over 200 miles away. The heat was so intense, it turned sand into glass. One scientist famously said it was like watching the birth of a new sun. But having the bomb was only half the equation. The real question was whether to use it. By the summer of 1945, Japan was already defeated. Their navy was destroyed. Their cities were being bombed daily by American aircraft. A naval blockade had cut off their supply lines. Any rational observer could see that Japan had lost the war. So why didn't they surrender? This is where the story gets complicated. Japan's leadership was split. Some wanted to negotiate a peace deal. Others believed they should fight to the last man, woman, and child. The Japanese military had convinced the population that death was preferable to surrender. They had trained women and children to fight with sharpened bamboo spears. Kamikaze pilots were turning their aircraft into guided missiles. American intelligence was picking up disturbing reports. Japan was mobilizing every available person for a final defense. They were bringing troops back from China and Manchuria despite the naval blockade. The Japanese were preparing for what they called the decisive battle on their home islands. This terrified American military planners because they knew what came next if Japan didn't surrender. Operation Downfall, the largest amphibious invasion in human history, and would make invasion at the beaches of Normandy look like a training exercise. The numbers were staggering. The initial assault on the southern island of Kyushu would involve 767,000 American troops. The follow-up invasion near Tokyo would require millions more. But here's what kept military commanders awake at night. Based on recent battles like Okinawa, they estimated that over 268,000 Americans would be killed or wounded just in the first phase. The Battle of Okinawa had shown them exactly what to expect. That nightmare had lasted almost 3 months and killed over 100,000 Japanese and American soldiers combined. The Japanese had fought with a ferocity that shocked even battle-hardened veterans. They used kamikaze attacks, suicide charges, and turned every cave and building into a fortress. If this was how they defended a single island, what would happen when they were defending their sacred homeland? But the casualties weren't the only thing keeping President Truman awake at night. There was another player in this deadly game, the Soviet Union. And this is where the story takes a turn that most Stalin had promised people never hear about. Joseph D. to enter the war against Japan. The Soviets were massing troops along the border with Japanese-held Manchuria. For Truman, this created a terror. If the warifying scenario dragged on for months or years, Stalin's forces would pour into Asia. They would occupy Japanese territory, just like they were doing in Eastern Europe. America would win, lose the peace. Think the war, but about it from Truman's perspective. He had inherited the presidency just months earlier when Franklin Roosevelt died. He was dealing with a weapon that could destroy entire cities, a war that was costing American lives every single day, and a Soviet ally who was quickly becoming a rival. The pressure was unimaginable. His military advisors painted him a grim picture. Intelligence reports showed that Japan had over 2 million troops defending their home islands. They had stockpiled weapons and supplies in caves and tunnels. They had prepared their entire population for a fight to the death. The Japanese government was telling its people that Americans would rape their women and kill their children. Surrender was not an option in their minds. American planners had studied every possible scenario. They looked at the geography of Japan, the strength of Japanese defenses, and the weather patterns that would affect any invasion. Every calculation pointed to the same horrifying conclusion. Hundreds of thousands of Americans would die. Millions of Japanese would perish. The war could drag on into 1946 or even 1947. Bombers were all ready. Meanwhile, American destroying Japanese cities with conventional weapons. Tokyo had been turned into ash and rubble. Osaka, Kobe, and dozens of other cities were in ruins. But still, Japan to surrender Uncon refused additionally. Their leadership clung to the hope that they could negotiate better terms. They wanted to keep their emperor, avoid occupation, and conduct their trial's own war. The atomic bombs ended the war in days, not years. Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945, just 6 days after Nagasaki. Operation Downfall was cancelled. Hundreds of thousands of American lives were saved. Millions of Japanese civilians who would have died in a prolonged invasion were spared. But the world entered the nuclear age, and we've been living with that reality ever since. The decision to drop those bombs shaped everything that followed.